Okay, before we start, if you caught last week's episode and thought, wait, did he just... no, you didn't. That was intentional. A stylistic choice. A bold, creative risk. I'm kidding. I missed a few editing things. It happens. But it's also kind of fitting because today is the winter show, the episode where I talk about what I'm playing next, what projects I'm planning, and how I'm going to execute, which is clearly something I needed to hear before I exported that last file. Welcome to the Tabletop SportCast. This is the Tabletop SportCast, your home for sports board game interviews, reviews, and project planning. Because the best sports stories aren't just watched, they're played. And today, we're leaning all the way into the season because winter is when the schedule gets quieter, the tabletop gets louder, and the hobby shifts into that perfect mode for replays, campaigns, and long-form projects. So today, I'm doing three things. The winter theme, what I'm in the mood to play and why, the winter slate, the projects and games I'm focusing on, and the winter execution plan, how I'm keeping momentum, tracking progress, and actually finishing what I started. Let's get into the winter show. Last week, episode 237, it was sitting down with Mark Unger and Ron Junkett. We heard a lot about this documentary project that Mark is getting kicked off and working on. Probably be, a lot of work happening. I'm sure, as you heard, he's going to reach out and look for some engagement across the board from people in the community. And if you feel like you have a story that might be worth telling, make sure you send it over to Mark. And we did include a email address in the show notes last week, so you could always reach out to him there. And then, of course, we got a chance to talk to Ron Junkett. It was great to get him back onto a podcast. It's been a while. I think he had said 9 months since he left Digital to Dice. So really good to hear Ron again and get a chance to actually sit down and talk with him as well. He continues to put stuff out on his Retro Sports Network. So if you are a big fan of Ron's, which I know a lot of you are, then, at least you have a way to connect with him still through the media on his YouTube channel. Last week, my weekly highlight was Bankshot Basketball, and I've been one of my projects, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, is to do some replays for the 75-76 ABA co-op that Andy Sexton is running. I was playing Kentucky against St. Louis, a really tight game, and St. Louis started, they fell back a little bit early. They were down early and just started chipping away. And in the final minutes, the game was just going back and forth. It was really tight. The last, most of the fourth quarter, certainly down in the last few minutes. And in that final plays of the game, St. Louis grabbed a rebound, was able to get a fast break started, and got a nice, easy bucket to take a 107-106 lead. And that was really how the game ended. It ended on that opportunity where they just caught Kentucky. My narrative is they just caught Kentucky getting a little lax at the end of the game and were able to quickly counter, get a quick layup, and win the game. 107-106 was the final of that one. So I've had a lot of fun because these are not players I'm that familiar with, but there are stars across the board on all of these teams that I do have some familiarity with, so it's nice to see them in their original elements for that 75-76 season. All right. In a minute, we'll come back and let's get into the winter show. So let's start really with this is a new format I'm going to be bringing in. I wanted to move away from, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago on the annual plan, move away from these quarterly retrospectives that I was doing. And they're still important to do the retrospectives. And and learn from, what you're doing on your table, especially around your projects, and continue to adapt how you're approaching the hobby. But this year, and while you'll hear that pop up from time to time, and it might even be during these kind of seasonal shows, I also really wanted to kind of set the tone for like what's the roadmap ahead look like. So that's really what these will be designed around. These seasonal shows will be around setting up the roadmap for what is coming onto my tabletop. So thematically, what is wintertime? Well, for me, it's really at the transition period between football season and baseball season. For me, even though football playoffs are, in full swing right now, I tend to find that I am moving away from football at this point, on my gaming table. I will work in a couple things here and there for football, and I'll start to, baseball's an always on activity for me anyway. So it's not like there's going to be anything major that changes for baseball other than how often I'm looking for it for other things too. But thematically for me, these next 3 months are really focused primarily around the other two major sports, which is basketball and hockey. Like this is the time of year where I really feel like I want to get those two games on the table more often than not. So thematically for me, it focuses on those two games. Now, I'm always going to be in the mode of like wanting to bring a variety of games to the table. I don't think that that's ever going to change. So you'll, as I'm recapping things, just still hear me talk about playing football or playing baseball or getting other games onto the table as well. But as I look at like the sports calendar right now, I think like, all right, well, what kinds of things are going on? It's football playoffs for the most part in January, whether it be college or a pro. Obviously, the basketball season and hockey seasons are in full swing, and we're starting to get, halfway through the seasons there. We're getting a good feel for who the better teams are. They're starting to make their positioning for the playoffs. And then as we, shift into February, we're going to see the start of like the NASCAR season, Daytona 500. We're going to, get spring training kicking off for baseball. We're going to then shift the calendar into March where like college basketball playoffs will start to come into play. And for me, like that's more like when I'll start to pay attention to that. We'll be wrapping up the seasons in April, for the other sports, but they'll certainly be getting into the crunch time of like the NBA and the hockey seasons in March. Baseball will be playing spring training games, and really by the end of March, or even kicking off the season. And it's usually March that we have like the big, WrestleMania event, right? Which I think still is the showcase event for wrestling, even though for me, I watch less and less of like professional wrestling these days. I still, kind of keep an eye towards the calendar of when these kind of events are taking place. So that's thematically what is going to be happening. And yeah, I think as I set up my calendar, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, I do like to pay attention to what are the thematic things that are happening and how do I want to make those like part of how I'm going to execute my projects. And so that's what we're doing here as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the projects, and I'll give you a little bit more on the execution plan for some of those projects as well. There's other big news, of course, and you probably saw the announcements that we have a brand new podcast joining the, sports board gaming, and that's not just sports, but like the board gaming lineup, and that is the new podcast that I'll be engaged with called the PLAAY Nation podcast. Really excited about this. This started to come up in December, and we've been working on it for a few weeks, trying to figure out the logistics, how this is going to play out. And it is really was originally designed as to be another avenue to help support play games. And it is definitely going to be a play games focused podcast, not just sports, but also their like non-sports library. So we're talking Play Classic, we're talking Play Now on this new podcast. A lot more to learn about in terms of that, and I would definitely encourage you to go check it out. Check us out on Facebook. Check out the podcast. We will have our first official episode coming out later this week, and I'm really excited about it. At the same time, it means I've got another thing on my plate that you didn't hear about as part of my annual plan, even though I already knew it was kind of coming, just couldn't really talk about it yet. So now I look at it and I say, okay, now how does that fit into the theme or into, my plan? And what's the impact to this podcast? And I'm sure some of you are wondering the same. And right now the plan is there's no impact. There'll be some impact, but hardly any. First, I'm going to keep the Tabletop SportCast on a weekly cadence. I feel that that's still an important thing that I want to do. I reserve the right to change that down the road, but for now, I feel good about being able to do 4 episodes of the Tabletop SportCast, a couple of episodes of the PLAAY Nation podcast, and then still be able to work on some of the other things that I have the hopes of working on. I had started to build my annual plan with a little less focus on other things. As you heard a couple weeks ago, I had said I'm really not planning on doing much with YouTube, and this is the thing that kind of like sealed the deal on that working on a second podcast, which is more my comfort zone. I'm really not set up really well to do YouTube, and I really don't want to try to make it something that I'm forcing myself to do if it's not really comfortable. What you might see is I'm thinking about getting the feed for the podcast set up on YouTube just to open it up to another audience. So you might start to see the Tabletop SportCast, pretty soon appearing on YouTube as well on my YouTube channel. This way the feed of the episodes goes directly there. But for the most part, I'm going to really just try to focus on these 2 podcasts and keep them both running as expected. We're going to have a lot of interviews as part of the PLAAY Nation podcast. Half of those will be Keith Avalon. We're going to have him on as a regular guest. And then I am going to plan to have interviews still be something that I focus on as well for the Tabletop SportCast. We're going to have another interview next week. We'll get to that later in the episode. So that, 2 interviews right out of the gate in January. I've got 2 planned for February. I'm hoping to keep that momentum going and bring interviews as a more regular feature item. But I also know that, I'm going to try to load up a little bit earlier in the year, and we'll see how it plays out later in the year with the interviews. Because I know, when it gets to be October, November, December, I tend to back off of doing the interviews. And if I can get 1 done in 1 or 2 done in those 3 months, I'll be happy with that, right? Same kind of goes for the summertime. It's a little bit harder to schedule people for interviews. So, I'm going to work around some of that, try to load up a little bit earlier on in the year as far as the interviews go. The other thing that will start to impact the Tabletop SportCast is I'm going to have an avenue to talk about play games. And I won't say that I won't talk about play games here, because I still think there'll be times where my individual feel for what play is doing or the play games is going to be really focused on the PLAAY Nation podcast, more on what's being released, what's going to be kind of in the current news. And it may not always align to the things that I want to talk about for play. At the same time, because I have this other vehicle to talk about play games, I think my focus here at the Tabletop SportCast it'll probably be like I've had my chance to speak to that, so I don't need to double down on that, right? And I will probably utilize the opportunity to talk more about other games as well. This will still be a sports-only podcast. The PLAAY Nation podcast gives me an avenue to talk about non-sports games, so I won't need, that was an itch that I wanted to scratch a little bit, so I'm going to get a chance to do that now on the other podcast. Allows this one to stay where I always intended it to be, which is very sports-oriented, sports-focused, and stick with the project themes. All right, and then lastly, what else happens in this winter theme is the idea of trying to work around the primary projects that I plan. So let's kind of shift our focus now and talk a little bit about the key projects that I do have planned for the podcast. Well, not for the podcast, but for my gaming table over these next 3 months. It starts, of course, with History Maker Baseball. It always does. I think when I look at my schedule, I always start at the top with History Maker Baseball and thinking about, like, what do I want to do? So I had not yet wrapped up my 2024 Mets replay. I should have that done. I'm down to the final 5 games. So the plan is to finish that this month, and I will do that. And then I had this decision to make. Do I play out the playoffs or do I not? And as of right now, I'm not planning to play out the playoffs. I might squeeze them in here and there. Like I might decide to, continue with that a little bit here and there. But right now, the plan is not to actually do the playoffs at all when it comes to my 2024 Mets replay. I'm going to finish the regular season and call that project complete. My first pivot of the year comes right away. Last week, when we did the annual plan, I talked about the fact that I was going to do a tournament around the 1996 MLB season. And here's why I pivoted, right? I was going to get to the card set, realized that the card set that I had was really a PDF. It was offered as a PDF as part of the holiday sale from PLAAY. So I had the PDF file. I'm like, okay, well, that's not a big deal. I'll just print out the cards. But then, I've been doing a lot of card cutting lately to get things ready for other projects. And I pulled up the PDF file for the 1996 season, realized they had carded just about every player. Somebody outside of Keith had created this card set, and they decided to take a little different approach. One of the things that I really like about the play game sets is they don't typically card every single player. I don't think there's a need to card every single player like ever in a card set. It's not something that I'm really a big fan of. I need just enough to be able to make the season work. And especially when you're planning a tournament, you don't need 40, 50 guys on a roster, especially with, the 1996 season is not nearly as bad as our current major league seasons, which are just ridiculous how many players they're using. I really hope at some point Major League Baseball comes in with a rule and just caps the number of players that teams are allowed to use during a season, because it is getting absurd. I think we're seeing rosters over 60 players now, and it's ridiculous the amount of pitchers that are used to get through a Major League Baseball season. That being a different note altogether, I looked at 52 pages that had to be printed. Then I'd have to cut those cards, and I just said, I don't really feel like doing that right now. So what I did is I went back and looked through my card sets and said, what haven't I really used yet that I might already have printed? Because, I do this all the time. I'll purchase a set, and then I will realize I don't have a spot for it right now. So I'll just kind of tuck it away and save it for a later date. And I had at one point planned a couple of years ago to do a combo season. I did kind of a team mashup between the 1973 and 1998 seasons. Well, I'm looking at my plan for this year, and I realized 1998 is one of the seasons that I'm planning on doing a project with later on in the year. I got all these cards that are mixed up together between the two teams. So what I was doing was mashing up the 73 Mets and the 98 Mets and making one roster for that team. So I sat down this weekend and really just broke those back into their original sets again and set it up so that I'll run a 1973 MLB tournament instead of 1996. I can still save that 96 season for a later date, right? And I probably will. There'll probably be a time where I'll come and say I want to use that set for something else. And thematically, it worked because it was going to be part of my 10 years back approach and all that stuff. But, this is not a time where I feel like I absolutely need to do that 10-year look back. I had something else planned for 1996 later in the year. So I have that decade covered as far as like my historical replays. So I said, why not? I've already got this card set. It's already printed. I purchased it. Why not do something with it? So that's what I'm going to do is switch this tournament over. If you are a Patreon member, I just posted the tournament file this morning. So you'll be able to get this 24 team tournament, which is not a number of teams I had set up before. So you'll get that the tournament structure that I'm going to use. For this particular tournament, because this is the other thing, you like to mix things up a little bit when you're doing these different projects. I decided to do a random draw for the tournament structure. And I'll be running this tournament through February and March, right? This is going to take me at least 2 months. It might bleed into April as well. I'm kind of waiting to see how that plays out, right? Here's how I did my random draw. And this is just an idea that you might be able to take advantage of. So I didn't want to just put a bunch of teams down and just pick them randomly, right? But I also wanted that randomness to exist. So I decided to do it as more of like a lottery system. I pulled up a spreadsheet, put each of the teams in, gave them, figured out how many wins they had in the 1973 season. It ranged from Cincinnati having 99 wins at the top of the house and Texas with only 57 wins being at the bottom. Well, each of them got a number of lottery picks equal to their wins. So Cincinnati got 99 lottery picks and Texas only got 57. Everybody else was somewhere in between. That set up a range for that team. So for, it was 1 to 99 for Cincinnati, and then everybody kind of went in place after that. And then I just did a random number generator, and I had it set up so that everything was dynamic, right? So as I would eliminate a team, it would calculate, here's how many lottery picks are remaining based on the random number that I'm going to generate between 1 and whatever that number is, and then pick a new number, right? And I was constantly doing that. And I started at the number 1 seed all the way down to number 24. My top 8 seeds are going to get buys because I really set it up based on a 32-team tournament structure. So the first 8 teams are going to get buys. And then everybody else would be the first of the remaining 16, 8 were going to be the home teams. We would pick those first, and then the 8 road teams. That was what I was going for. And it worked out pretty good. A lot of the teams ended up around where you would think that they would. Chicago Cubs ended up getting my number 1 seed. They vaulted all the way to the top and won the lottery in a sense. They really were I think they were a 77-win team. So, they beat the odds a little bit to take the number 1 seed. The 2 bottom seeds, the last 2 seeds were the lowest ranked teams, San Diego and Texas, with I forget how many wins San Diego had. I think they were in the 65 range or something, and then obviously Texas with 57. So they ended up with the 2 lowest seeds. Most of the other teams ended up right in the same ballpark, but Cincinnati dropped quite a bit. So Cincinnati, who had the chance to really should have been the number 1 seed, because of my random draw, they just got unlucky, and they actually fell all the way down to one of the road teams. So they were in the bottom third of teams in this lottery pick. So they'll have a little bit of an uphill climb. It sets up an interesting bracket for their section where they are going to be on the road against Kansas City. Kansas City was a pretty strong team. Probably would have been one of my, I think they would have ended up being one of my, if I had done it based on winning percentages, they would have been one of the 8 teams along with Cincinnati to get a bye week in the first round. So instead, Kansas City and Cincinnati have to play each other. And then the winner of that will go on the road to take on the New York Mets, who did get a bye week. Probably would have been right around that number. I forget if they would have been in the top 8 or not. But, they were an 82-win team that year, even though they ended up going to the World Series. So that's how that project is set up. That's my History Maker baseball is 2024 Mets, finish it up, finish the regular season, call it done, and then run this 1973 MLB tournament. And yes, I'm going to run that tournament with the full game of History Maker baseball. Still have some logistics to work out, like pitching rotations, and I have to set up all the teams and make sure that they're all ready to go for that, decide how I'm going to line up starting pitching, as we go through the tournament as well. Then we get to my quarterly project, which, as I mentioned, is working on this 75-76 ABA co-op. Andy Sexton set this up where he wants like full stats. And when I say full stats, he really just needs points, rebounds, assists. So I could have gotten away with some other games here too, but I purchased a card set for Bank Shot Basketball. I'm really not going to be wanting to do like a lot of full play basketball necessarily. So I think it'll be mostly sticking to Bank Shot. And I just pick a game every week to play. And I'll do that for 13 weeks throughout the whole first quarter. My goal is to get every one of the teams on the table. And so far it's been pretty successful. Let me see. How many of the teams have I gotten on the table so far? Of the 9 teams, I only have 2 left. I have to get the San Diego Sales and the Denver Nuggets onto my table still. So they have not been available. The project is not moving along very quickly. So I've been playing most of my games so far from the same real time frame, like of just like the same week pretty much. And that's just the way it's going. It's just there hasn't been a lot of activity in that particular co-op that Andy is running. So I'll continue to do that, continue to play Bank Shot Basketball with that. My struggle with Bank Shot Basketball, and I know this has come up a little bit, it has been around the card counting. My first game that I played, I added in the pacing numbers, put in the extra cards for every segment, and just found that my score was way above where I wanted it to be for the final. My next game, I've played now 3 games, right? So my next game, I went and I was like, I'm not going to use any of the pacing. I'm just going to go with my set, like 42 cards per segment. And at the end of that game, I was like, I'm probably a little under here. So I went through and did an extra. I added the pacing cards per quarter as opposed to per segment and felt pretty good with where that ended. When I did my third game, I decided that the away team would go for all the odd segments. I would use their pace, and for the home team, I would use their pace for the even segments, so that each of them influenced one every quarter. That ended up with a final score that felt pretty close to where it should be in the end. So that's probably the method I'm going to use. But I know talking with others, like this is a topic of conversation that comes up a lot when it comes to Bank Shot Basketball, is how to figure out the pace cards and adjust the timing mechanisms with the fact decks. But I really like using the fact decks. It feels very status pro-ish in the sense that there are 2 fact decks. One is the action deck. The other one gives me all my random numbers. So I'm not even going to do any die rolling for this. And I had played it in the past without the random number generators. And it's a lot of dice rolling, right? It's a lot of dice rolling in addition to having to work with the fact deck. So it's works pretty well with the 2 decks. It's not a big deal having the 2 decks. One really functions as your timing and generating, like setting up the possession. The other one helps you just get all your random numbers, and then you use it for a couple of other things like fast breaks and extra narratives, like for the special events, things like that. So it's working really well. It still takes me a little while to play it. I have also been using the Purple Wolf spreadsheet that Mike Ignatowski has created. That has been just a game changer for me. I really love playing with it. It does force me to be in front of the computer. I haven't figured out yet how to generate all of the game log events without it. And there probably is some ways to do it, but for now it's working to have it in front of the computer. It helps me keep track of what's happening. I can see like when somebody gets in foul trouble, do all that kind of stuff without having to do extra record keeping. And that's the one thing that kind of stinks when it comes to playing a full play basketball game, is all of the record keeping, all the stat keeping that has to happen. So not a huge fan of that, but I think Mike's done a really good job of figuring out how to capture it in a pretty straightforward way. So if you're a basketball fan and looking for a good utility, that Purple Wolf spreadsheet is a big time winner. Then we get to the tournaments. I've got 2 tournaments planned in Q1 in my winter season. And as you've heard so far now, we did some baseball, we did some basketball. My 2 tournaments are basketball and hockey, and both focused on professional women's leagues. I am starting right now. I'm replaying my 2025 WNBA tournament. I went for that one with straight seeds. I'm using Highlight Maker hoops to play the games out. I usually play 2 games per session for that, so that will take me into February. I have just a couple of games that I'll have to play in February. I might, just to get the game on the table, I might play the championship game using Primetime, Highlight Maker Hoops Primetime, and play that as a full game as opposed to just playing the Highlight Maker Hoops version. So that I'm kind of reserving still, but that is something I'm definitely considering to at least say, kind of check the box on playing Primetime. For my hockey tournament, I'm doing the 2025 PWHL. So there was a lot of women's leagues that were offered as part of the PLAAY holiday sale, and that got me to thinking, I should really try to focus a little bit more on some of the women's sports and make that more of my theme for this year. So I've decided to do that, kind of introduce myself to some of those leagues. I'll be honest, last year, I ended up watching, I kind of caught that Caitlin Clark fever, got interested in watching the Indiana team, the Indiana Fever, last year. I ended up probably watching more of their games than I did combined, like the college basketball men or even the NBA, right? I ended up probably watching more of their games than anybody in any of those leagues. So for me, it was an easy adjustment. Now, in hockey, haven't really gotten into watching the women's league yet, but maybe this will spark some interest and get me to watch it a little bit. I don't know if they got women's hockey in the Olympics or not. It's something I'll have to kind of pay attention to. I think they have had it in the past, so it would make sense that it'll be there again. And then, it made me think, do I have always enjoyed women's tennis, so that's an easy one to add. I've always enjoyed women's soccer, used to coach it too, so that was an easy one to add. And it just felt like, this is something I could definitely build a theme around, is incorporating some of these women's sports. I haven't set up the PWHL tournament just yet, so I haven't decided what format that one's going to take. And I also haven't decided if I'm going to play the full game of Hockey Blast or if I'm going to use Hockey Blast Express. I think I will probably use the full game. I'm not as big a fan of the Express game, and I don't find that the full game takes me that long to play. So similar to the reason I don't really play History Maker Baseball Express, it's just, the time savings doesn't feel like it's all that much. So I'll probably end up just playing that tournament using the full game of Hockey Blast is what I'm leaning towards right now. As far as my historical replays go, I already played one, which was the 1936 NHL, 35-36 NHL. They had a game which I think is still on record as the longest game ever. I tried to replay that one. Mine ended up not even going into overtime, but back then they had, it was the Detroit Red Wings and the Montreal Maroons, not the Canadiens. It was a different franchise. And they ended up playing a 6 overtime game that ended up in 1-0 game. I didn't get it to work out that way. Detroit dominated. I think they won 4-0 or 3-0 or 4-1, something along those lines. So my game didn't end up going into overtime. I also am planning on with Pocket Pennant Run. I am going to replay the first ever National League game from 1876. This is right after the National Association. I think last year I ended up playing the last game of the National Association, so it seemed kind of fitting that I would turn around and play the first game ever of the new National League. So that is going to be a game between, I think it's going to be Boston and Philadelphia in the old NL. So that's going to be my second historical replay. And then I haven't decided what the third one is. I have one penciled in, but I don't think the card sets will be ready just yet. So I'm probably going to flip that out and bring something else in. So more to come on what that third event is going to be. I got a placeholder right now, but I do have 12 events planned for the year. So it's just a matter of determining which one is going to end up being the one that I go after in March. And then along the way, I'll be, playing my kind of featured table Fridays, one of my new segments, and I will work in other games into the mix as I go through that. So far, the games that I have featured as part of my, featured table Friday, have been, let's see, a couple of them are still coming up here. But I have already done Dice United, where I was able to do some co-op action. I did Fury Hardball. I also did Second Season, so still bringing some football in there. That was part of a co-op. And then the last two that I'm going to do this month and is going to be Play at the Races, the new horse racing game. And I just picked up Travis Jansen's really cool tray, so I'm really excited to try the game with his trays. And then Red Ice Hockey is going to get an appearance on my table. I'm going to use it for the last time as part of that 81-82 NHL co-op. I'm signing up to do some of the playoff games for the co-op, and I'll probably shift to a different game. I'm either going to continue to play Hockey Blast because it's Hockey Blast, or I might also use Highlight 49 Highlights Hockey is another possibility for me in that co-op. So I'm looking at those two as being the ones that I'm going to use for the playoffs there. For the month of February, I haven't figured out what's going to happen in March, but for the month of February, my featured table games are going to include Soccer Blast, again, 49 Highlights Hockey, because I'm planning on doing that as part of the co-op. The Squared Circle, which I will be doing the classic New York territory. And then a game I'm waiting for to arrive, the new Fast Drive Football Fantasy Draft. If you haven't had a chance to see it, Steve Tower just did an episode of this on Friday, this past Friday. Really cool looking game that you get to do a fantasy draft and then actually play the game using Fast Drive Football. So I have that on order, waiting for it to arrive. I will work it in to the month of February as soon as it gets here, and then, kind of give you like a report on that once we get a chance to get that on the table. So yeah, that's kind of the approach there for most of my projects. Along the way, I'm also kicking off my two projects that I didn't mention as part of my annual plan was Grid Zone. I have kicked off the 5th season of the American Grid Zone League. So I'm going with the two leagues again, National League and Champions League, as we play that promotion relegation format. So Grid Zone on a table again, be playing a little bit of it throughout every month this year. And that will obviously mean I get through weeks 1 through 3 out of 10 in this winter season. And then the other project that I'll have going on, and this one probably won't wrap up until 2027, quite honestly, but I am going to just like once a month, just run a race for redoing the 1992 NASCAR season. And I'll be running the Daytona 500 probably tomorrow, actually. And then next month will be the second race of the season, which would be the GM Goodwrench 500. And then I'll run the third race in March, even though I haven't kind of put that onto the calendar just yet. And that is really what I've got planned as far as the winter season. So you can hear a lot of tournaments. And as I do the tournaments, I want to try to mix in different formats. And depending on the size of the league, I didn't mention it, but with the WNBA tournament, I decided to make it a 2-month project, right? It's taking 2 months to deliver that one. The PWHL, the Women's Hockey League, fewer teams, so that one should be a little bit easier to deliver in 1 month. I haven't decided if it's going to be a single elimination tournament, although probably will be. How I'm going to set up the matchups. Didn't work all that out yet. I'll start to do that as I get closer to March. But yeah, as I run tournaments, I'm trying to mix up the different formats for the tournaments, try some different things. And then when it comes to some of the bigger projects, like quarterly projects, this month, this quarter, the winter season focused on basketball. And each of my quarterly projects really fits into each of the seasonal themes there as well. And that's really what we've got going. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. And, it's wintertime. And as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of this episode, it is the time where you just, it is cold. This is one of the coldest years I can remember. Being in Virginia, we tend to usually have pretty mild winters, but that has not been the case this year. It's been cold more often than not. The days are shorter, right? And you just feel like there's less you can do outside, right? There's less you can be out and about doing. And I feel like it's a really good time for the hobby, right? Because this is the kinds of stuff we can do indoors. We can pull out some board games and just spend the day. And if the weather stinks outside, you're just like, all right, well, that's fine. I got some things I can do. And for me, it means I get a little bit more gaming time in. And I'll usually get off to a pretty good start. But I also like to make that part of the plan too, and to make sure that I get the ball rolling on a number of these projects and make sure that I feel like I'm building momentum for later in the year. Because I know what'll happen when I hit summertime is the tables will turn, right? I will be outside more often. We will have more things that we're planning as a family. We will be out of the house more. And I'll be looking around like, wow, when am I ever going to get that game on the table? So I'll plan for less when it comes to the summertime. And I think that that's a really good approach to take. But at the same time, there's less things going on in the sports world. When you get to the summer months, it's really focused on baseball and not much else. So, for me, like I will build my themes each season around what's happening in the real world as far as the sports world goes. And there's some exciting things coming up. As we mentioned a few of them, I missed one of the big events that is actually coming up, which is going to be the Winter Olympics. I'll be tuned into that. That is one of the sporting events. And again, I won't watch everything, but those are sports that I don't typically get a chance to see, regularly. So I'll want to watch some of the things like curling or skiing, I'll be into those. And I'll like the hockey to a degree, but, I watch plenty of hockey usually. I watch some figure skating, but it's not like a big draw for me, right? So it's going to be more some of those other sports that I kind of remember watching as a kid, watching the skiing, watching some of the sledding, bobsledding, curling, like those events that I don't typically get a chance to see regularly. It will be part of like that 2 weeks of the Olympics that I'll be really looking forward to as well. And that's kind of it. Let's come back and wrap up today's episode in just a minute. Yeah, that is a wrap on episode 238. We are counting down towards 250, which we'll get to a little bit later this year, and that'll be our next milestone episode. But today we focused on the winter show and really setting up what the winter season will look like on my table, how it parallels what's happening in real life, and how I'm going to utilize my time and really try to plan for the future. Success for me always comes down to, can I get the projects across the finish line in a timely manner? And also, is it enjoyable? I don't want to just make it about a churn. I actually want to get something out of the projects that I'm playing. We'll probably do a recap soon of the 2024 Mets replay. I think it's really important, especially with some of the projects. If you haven't heard, there's some good research projects going on through Sabre. And if you're doing any kind of baseball project, like get connected there, because that is going to be something that I think the more of us that can feed into that, the better. There's some people are really starting to think about our hobby and what it means in terms about learning like the statistical numbers around some of these sports. I think people are starting to do more compilation of some of the numbers that we're generating out of these different replay projects, some of the games that we're using. And I think that's pretty cool. So if you're able to take part in that, like make sure you read up on it. I'll try to maybe highlight that in an upcoming episode as well. As always, you can check us out on different socials. If you want to send an email to talk about the podcast, talk about projects, you can send me one at tabletopsportcast@gmail.com. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing on my tabletop and follow my Facebook page, it's facebook.com/tabletop sportcast. And lastly, if you'd like to help support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/tabletop sportcast, where $1 a month really does go a long way to helping to offset costs for the podcast. As I mentioned, I posted a new tournament there, and there might be some more content coming there as well, as I'm kind of thinking about the things that I want to do on that Patreon feed as well. Didn't really talk about too much what I'm doing from a game design standpoint, but we'll probably have more on that in the next couple of weeks as well. But for next week, we're going to talk projects one more time, and co-op projects specifically, because I'll be sitting down with Andy Sexton, who's been running a lot of the co-ops that I have been taking part in. So we're going to get a chance to talk to Andy this week. You'll hear it next week as we do an interview. And then looking forward to that and sitting down with Andy this week. And also, last plug, but our first episode of the PLAAY Nation podcast is also coming out later this week. So if you get a chance to put that into your weekly schedule and hopefully add some more to your weekly commute, probably not a lot of people doing lawn care right now, but finding a way to get those podcasts worked into your weekly schedule, always appreciated the way you're supporting it. And hopefully this will give you another avenue to hear about this great hobby. All right, until next week, thanks for listening.